Welcome, everybody, to episode 329 of WordPress Weekly for Wednesday, August 29th, 2018. I'm your host, Jeff Chandler, joined by the one and only, I think, J-Trip.
I hope so. There's a radio station.
Yeah, I know. Australia, I think it is.
Yeah, and then like one of the Green Lanterns is a Jonah Jameson Jr. I think he's another one. But otherwise, of the three, I am one of them.
Well, you're one of the three. Your WordPress is J-Trip. You're the one and only J-Trip in the WordPress community. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to don't have a guest scheduled. So we're just going to cover some of the headline. Of course, Gutenberg. There's so much to talk about every week, but maybe more so than other weeks this week with Gutenberg. But before we get to that, again, I want to get through some housekeeping items. On the last week's episode, I mentioned that WordPress.com changed their privacy policy for a certain change for certain content that was hosted on their network. It wasn't the privacy policy. It was the terms of service. The privacy policy has remained unchanged. I wanted to get that out there. Shout out to Heather Burns for keeping me on my toes regarding that information. And we were talking a little bit about, on last week's episode, the development process for Gutenberg and whether or not after Gutenberg is merged into Core, would it be possible to see WordPress sort of go back to its original sort of release strategy where there was about 3 major releases per year every 4 months, or would we see a vast increase in the number of point releases in order to iterate on Gutenberg quickly, as it would be part of Core? And somebody left a comment on the show notes post with the name of a longtime Core contributor. I don't know who that is, but you know, we live in an era where people cannot. Longtime Core contributors do not want to identify themselves by name, which is I don't know. It's kind of sad if you think about it, but that's the state of things.
Or they can just masquerade around as someone who pretends to be a long-time Core contributor. Yeah. Maybe they're not. You never know with comments like that, right?
Well, they might not, but based on their comment, it sounds awfully like they are a long-time Core contributor. But this person says that I think there is some reasonable discussion there about merging things into Core early, which was your suggestion. Maybe we should just ship Gutenberg into Core right now, and then we'll work through the pain as quickly as we can. And then this person says the plugins as features paradigm has been tried for quite a while now, and while it is resulting in more complete pieces, it also seems like it is taking those longer and longer times before they are ready. Now, don't get me wrong. I can see the benefits of building these big pieces of functionality separately, but at the same time, the audience for those pieces is much reduced by not having them in Core very, very early on, which is something else you brought up.
Yep.
And they continue on and say that when you are insulated, working amongst yourselves in a small group, then yes, you can iterate quickly. But then as you get further and further away from the main project, then you end up being isolated and alienated from it. Maybe we should consider for any new features like this to have the distance. Use the feature as plugin paradigm up until we have a workable product, regardless of completeness, and then merge immediately into trunk there, bring more eyeballs on it instantly. And they continue on. It says trunk gets a lot of views and a lot of people run it. And the kind of people who run trunk don't generally mind brokenness or incompleteness. You can iterate rapidly, but always with the notion of merge to trunk is a couple weeks away. Keep that pressure on. Maybe then we can get the most usefulness and speed out of this idea of features being separated from the main line, because we always get value out of the main line. Separating everything important leads to a vast gap, which seems undesirable in the long run. So
it is
basically
much better.
It sounds like they agree with
you. Yeah, it's a much better way to say all of the things that I said on last week's show. And so, yeah, that's the we're talking about WordPress Core's development, and is something that we've done differently in easy digital downloads for 3.0. Is like the ways that those are different is that WordPress releases are tagged from trunk, where there isn't a 5.0 alpha branch being worked on right now. That technically is trunk, and there aren't multiple paths being taken at the same time, like Git as a piece of software would allow features to be built in. So with EDD3, we are able to work on 5 different major features in parallel with one another, and then eventually merge them into a branch that is for the 3.0 release. It's not in master yet. Master is where all of the stable 2.9 stuff still happens. So WordPress having this like trunk is the next release really makes it this like finite final decision. It's a funnel. Everything has to go into trunk in order for it to be blessed for the next release. But if we had a Gutenberg only 5.0 alpha, there would be a little bit more merging from trunk to that alpha branch. And there would be things that happen in the alpha branch that would have to get merged back into trunk. But as long as we're diligent about those things, that being the sort of crux of all the issues is being diligent about it, then it really doesn't affect very much. But
I know on the Tavern we're using, it says development version 5.0 alpha 43588, but
exactly.
I have no idea what's in there.
It's running from trunk.
Yeah, it's running from trunk, but there's no Gutenberg in there because that's being developed as a plugin. And
and it's not a problem of stability. Trunk is considered stable. Nothing should go into trunk unless trunk can run it in a stable kind of way. But it does prevent that sort of multiple trains of thought and like multiple attempts, right? Like we could have 2 different types of Gutenbergs being built, and we may want to see how one or another feels in WordPress directly, and we can't do that now without someone having a fork of WordPress that is running Gutenberg inside of it in the way that they would want it to fit or whatever. I wish I had a better segue for us talking about forks of WordPress, because I know we're going to talk about those, but that's my closing statement. I don't have a good segue.
No, something else I saw that was brought up is that because development of Gutenberg is happening on GitHub, they're using Git. How will that transition into trunk, which uses Subversion? Do you know?
Yeah, right. So I do know, and it's the nice thing is that the majority of Gutenberg and its assets will they are kind of architected to just get plunked into WordPress, into WP includes, and just bubble up into a compiled JavaScript file and whatever resources that it might need additionally, if it's icons or a custom version of Dash icons or whatever else. And so it's pretty low friction in terms of getting Gutenberg merged into core. The only things that are high friction are removing the things in Gutenberg that, like the top level Gutenberg admin menu, the demo link, all that stuff just goes away. You don't want that in WordPress core. And then making sure that the PHP side of whether or not Gutenberg is the editor that should be used makes sense for the once it's landed literally into WordPress core itself. So there are some little things that literally cannot happen, and code that cannot be written until Gutenberg is in WordPress core, and then it can kind of be abstracted away a little bit. Right now it's abstracted too far away. When it lands in core, it will be way too much of a dependency, and then it'll have to sort of even out in some ways. And then the trickier thing of all of that we haven't talked about in a few episodes is really truly how much in the code is the Gutenberg name going to stick or be available. Like Tiny MCE, the editor that's been in WordPress for a really long time, isn't really mentioned in the code base of the abstraction that we use for WordPress. It's a visual editor or not. It's we don't talk about Tiny MCE in the same ways that we do talk about Gravatar, because Gravatar is a service that is used, so you have to mention that. But even though SimplePy is a class and is a separate project that exists on GitHub that's maintained by Ryan McHugh and some other folks, it gets abstracted out into functions that don't call it SimplePy. So how much code is literally going to be called and named Gutenberg and not is another thing that is hard to decide until it lands directly into WordPress core or not. So there are little things that have to happen. It's not hard to get it in there, but it's hard to sweep all the dust away after it settles.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Gutenberg, there's a couple of cool things that have been developed for it recently, and one of them is a tool by it's called the Gutenberg Block Library. So if there's atomic blocks, stackable code blocks, these are sort of like collections of blocks. But apparently in Gutenberg, it's not as easy as you'd think to search for the individual blocks that these collections contain. So Danny Cooper built a centralized library of Gutenberg blocks that are currently available. And what this does is the library loads blocks into a grid, and using infinite scroll, you can also search via blocks. I think blocks are tagged, and things are grouped together in similar blocks. And individual listings display screenshots of the block in action and its settings panel, as well as a link to the author and a link to download. So this is a pretty neat tool if you're going to use a number of different blocks. If you're going to use block collections, which seems to be the cool thing right now, adding this little tool will make it a lot easier to find blocks within those collections, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
This is another one of those good examples of like the classic press thing, like we talked about before, or even WP CLI. It's like someone identifies a need, and there's a gap where we are missing something for Gutenberg. They take the initiative to get it done and to have there be some resource or directory or library for Gutenberg blocks. So you can choose to look at this positively and see like someone built a thing and identified a need and built it, right? It's like Automotive and the VC fund that they're doing. They see a need, they built it, they executed on it, they got it done. And it's someone can choose to look at this and say, well, this directory really belongs in WordPress.org, or maybe it's a little too early for this to exist because Gutenberg hasn't even officially launched yet. It's still in beta and everything else. And so this is another one of those initiatives that either you love it or you hate it, or either you're behind it or you're not. And
depending how user interaction goes with it, if it solves a need, it could quite easily, something like it could be merged back into Gutenberg, into core.
It could be merged back into core. It could be available on WordPress.org. It has legs. I think it's a great idea because it is for sure a need. And just like other folks in company, I would hate to use Apple for an example for stuff, but Gutenberg blocks are a different kind of they're a different avenue. They're not a plugin and they're not a theme. They are a block. Just because they use plugins as a way to get activated doesn't mean that they don't deserve their own primary kind of directory, the same as Apple Watch apps are different than Mac OS apps, or different than iOS apps, but you still have to have some delivery mechanism to get them in there. So a directory for Gutenberg blocks is useful, and it'll be neat to see where the next steps for this are and what everybody thinks and where it ends up.
So let's talk a little bit about Gutenberg and the classic editor. Since it's been about 3 weeks now since the Try Gutenberg prompt was sent out in WordPress 4.9.8, the plugin has now passed 200,000 active installs, and the classic editor plugin, I think, it's come to more than 200 active installs. But some people are looking at that number and saying, see, nobody wants Gutenberg. But in reality, a lot of those people installing that are using it as to give themselves a runway to transition to Gutenberg, gives themselves a little bit more time. Or they simply don't like Gutenberg. It could be one or the other, or it could be a number of reasons. But in response to recent discussions surrounding the classic press fork of WordPress, I believe we mentioned this last week, Matt said that there's no plans to ever ever have a direct vote determine strategic direction in WordPress, but we're having a bit of a referendum and adoption of the Gutenberg and Classic Editor plugins. People are voting with their usage, and the people are deciding. And Sarah Gooding here in this article says that with the number of Classic Editor plugin installations on the rise, WordPress is headed towards a fractured admin experience. For some, it may be a healthy transition option, but in the end, the number of Classic Editor installations indicates how many sites will be running on alternative editing experience because site owners are either not ready or not willing to adopt Gutenberg. And this is something that's been discussed heavily in the past couple of days on Twitter with members of the WordPress community, is that the idea of perhaps creating the LTS version of WordPress, a clean fork, so that it's frozen and you get security updates and whatnot, but at least, you know, as Morton describes, it gives you an even longer runway towards eventually transitioning over to WordPress 5.0 and Gutenberg. But then Kevin Hoffman, who works for GiveWP, in fact, he even brought this up at the State of the Word last year during a Q&A session. And, you know, at some point, I guess, as a plugin developer, you're going to have to decide, do you just want to support Gutenberg? Do you want to support both editing experiences? And I don't know, I guess it all depends on your user base and what's going on, and you would have to know your users, but maybe in the beginning you support both interfaces, or do you just push everybody to Gutenberg right off the bat? I don't know.
You push everyone to Gutenberg right off the bat.
Yeah,
you have to. That's the only thing you can do. It is the way that it's going to happen, because the Classic Editor plugin and using it as a metric, the same as using the Gutenberg plugin as a metric and the number of installs, quite frankly, is like an interesting mistake for Matt to have been committed to make. Because Matt's usually better about being non-committal like this. And it's tea leaves and tarot cards. You're going to read them however you want and interpret the results however you want to interpret them. And so it's unfortunate that, and it's kind of a distraction away from getting the job done and making this good for everybody. Like, the numbers are whatever you want them to be. And so high or low, good or bad, you justify them with whatever reasoning you're going to justify them with. And at the end of the day, this is a feature that's going to ship in WordPress 5.0. And the sooner that it gets merged in a way that feels realistic to what everyone's expectations are, is the better that everyone can get used to what this is and how this feels, contribute to making it better, and make 5.0 the next best version of WordPress yet.
There is also some news about WordPress 4.9.9, and as of now, Jeff Paul says that there's no specific timeline for 4.9.9. That'll get set once the release leads are in place. He says you'd like to try and finalize the leads in next week's meeting, which is today or shortly thereafter, so they can pin down some 4.99 planning and coordination as we get into September. And he says that until we have a confirmed timeline and plan for 5.0, his assumption is that they'll continue with the minor release cadence of 6 to 8 weeks with a specific focus on items needed in support of 5.0. Now,
so
if we look back...
Since we're talking about 4.9.9 and since we're talking about Jeff Paul, I want to take a minute to say that Jeff Paul's doing an amazing job in wrangling kind of all of the 4.9 everything experiences here, because this is a unique situation for shipping versions of WordPress that really hasn't ever happened in the history of WordPress. There is a large looming release, and there is still lots of ongoing development in the current release, and juggling security issues and releases with Aaron Campbell and the rest of the security team, who also deserve a huge props and shout out in scheduling, in hustling and getting this done, and being more communicative on HackerOne. That there are a lot of moving parts to this that were never moving before, and so Jeff Paul is doing a great job of keeping everyone in the loop, commenting on the make blogs, and just managing and wrangling the release schedule for all of these miners. It's a huge, complicated undertaking, and I think it kind of deserves to be recognized a little bit. So thank you, Jeff, for doing all.
You're welcome. Oh no,
I got you.
Jeff
Oh
Paul,
gosh,
Jeff Paul.
not you.
Okay, thank you. I think it's obvious, but so no specific timeline for 999. And if you look at that obviously, of course, there is a lot of TBDs on the roadmap for 5.0. And earlier this year at WordCamp Europe, Matt sort of suggested a roadmap that they were going to try and stick to. And Matt Malloy says the WordPress 5.0 could happen as early as August. Well, we could throw that out the window. That's not going to happen. But it's not looking like 5.0. Okay, yeah, sure. It's not looking like 5.0 will drop closer to the end of the year. So getting back to what you were just talking about, WordPress point releases. We've seen point releases now that of course, we had the one earlier this year with all the GDPR stuff that included UI forward-facing user features.
Mm-hmm.
There have been other point releases that have sort of removed the paradigm of all these years that point releases were maintenance and security only, or at least that's what they were supposed to be. That's what they were labeled as. Mm-hmm. And in the discussion of releases and what have you with members of the WordPress community, Chris Regman, who works for a company, works down south there in Florida, he says that I should add to that, at least here, our admin's faith in WordPress is shaken at best in how the upgrades from 4.9.6 and up have been handled. They're no longer completely sure they could trust the project guidance going forward, and I can't stress how big of a deal this is. And I didn't even really think about that, but I mean, it is all this time. You know, we've taught users, we've taught agencies what to expect. If there's a point release, it'll be automatically updated, and it usually contain security and bug fixes. But that hasn't been the case for the past 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how that sort of how he describes it, how that's affected other agencies, other companies, maybe other enterprise environments that now they don't know what they're getting in these WordPress versions.
So I don't think it matters to most people. It matters to us because we live it all day, every day. And it probably matters to our listeners a little bit more because they probably live it all day, every day. I don't think it matters to most people. What matters more is how we communicate what's going on to the people that are going to be impressioned by this experience of these WordPress releases coming out. GDPR is a unique case where the deadlines for everything kind of dictated that it was a feature that deserved to exist in WordPress proper for everyone. I don't love the idea of something that big being pushed in a minor release, but at the same time, when we are automatically pushing majors and everything else and everything is okay, it won't matter. And so it's mostly just me being old and unsure about something that is irrelevant. So it really doesn't matter. The interesting part about what has happened so far for the 4.9 release cycle, and for something like the GDPR feature and these 4.9.456.789 now, is that for most of the rest of the software development world, 5.0 doesn't come after 4.9. What happened? 4.10 comes after 4.9. And so the GDPR could have been 4.10. We could have had something else in a 4.11. We could keep going down the 4.0 direction and adding features while Gutenberg and things are happening in 5.0. It really is just our not wanting to change the way that we work too much as the reason why all these things got pushed into the 4.9 dot whatever release. So,
if you look at the release philosophy, 4.9 shouldn't be any different than 5.0 I think you could sort of turn that on its head with Gutenberg and 5.0.
That's right. And 5.0 is a one of those like the psychology of numbers where it feels like it's supposed to be a big deal. And so to not have it be a big deal means to not match people's expectations on what 5.0 is supposed to be.
And Matt has brought this up before about the psychology of numbers and even number releases. But he because he's tied Gutenberg to 5.0 and because of what Gutenberg represents and what it's going to do with WordPress, 5.0 is a monumental, it's a huge release.
It is a huge release, and having been guilty of building the hype for something that has taken too long to ship, it is a trap. It is a trap that is hard to dig out of, because as the pressure gets higher to do a better job, you sort of are afraid that you are not going to, haven't done as good of a job as what people have hoped that you have.
I have not seen any recent photos of Matt Mulloway, but I wonder how long his Gutenbeard is.
I wonder if the reason that there are no recent pictures of Matt is because the Gutenbeard is just unsightly.
It's longer than that guy's in ZZ Top.
I was just gonna say he's gone full ZZ Top. And did you know ZZ Top was in Back to the Future 3?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they were actually the band playing the folk song.
They were the band of the folk song.
And that was a good song too.
It was a good song. Now it's in your head.
Thank you for the Back to the Future. Don't you ever question me on Back to the Future stuff. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Now, for those of you wondering about, well, how long is this Classic Editor plugin going to be around? Do I have to worry? And, when Matt announced that there would be a Classic plugin at the State of the Word, I sort of had in my mind that, okay, this is probably going to give people 2 years to figure out what they want to do and how they can transition over to Gutenberg. But Matt Mulloway recently commented on the WP Tavern site, and he says that I love that people are using the Classic Editor plugin. There is an infinite number of ways that WordPress can be used, and not all will be ready for Gutenberg when 5.0 is released. Classic allows people to still be able to update core and stay current with releases with the click of a button to try out Gutenberg again in the future if they want to. It's also trivial to maintain because Gutenberg also uses TinyMCE, so Classic Editor users will still get improvements and updates to TinyMCE. Now, I won't say forever, but I don't see any reason why we can't maintain Classic for the edit screen for many years to come, end quote. Yeah. So there you have it. So, Classic Editor is going to be around for a long time, and if it's not going to be, if it's not Matt or Automatic or somebody maintaining it, it will be 5 to 10 other plugins that will. There will always be an option to have Classic Editor in WordPress if that's what you prefer.
Yeah, I think that's another one of those things where you can choose to look at as a positive or a negative. It's the same thing. Like, it's good that it's there, but people are going to use it existing as evidence that Gutenberg isn't ready, or that it's possible that it's not going to be good enough for, whatever else. Like, would we have been better off without a Classic Editor plugin and just saying, like, we are all in on Gutenberg or not?
And Matt is placing his bets. He's hedging his bets that the plugin and theme authors out there are going to be the ones that drive adoption to Gutenberg. They're going to have to come up, like what he says, like the cost analysis, the benefits, and point people. It's kind of like PHP. Getting people to upgrade their PHP. Hey, look, if you want the best of this, or you want to do something easier, check out this interface, Gutenberg. Yep. And that's really where a lot of the driving adoption is going to come from initially.
The thing is, every other piece of software maybe internally receives this level of scrutiny. Maybe at Google or Apple or Microsoft, when they're making changes to Office 365 UI or their suite of like-minded Office apps, that maybe there are 10,000 people within the company all having an internal debate about design decisions that are going on and what's supposed to happen with these apps. I doubt it. But at the same time, there are fan sites, there are podcasts, there are folks that talk about betas and what they see and what they like and what they don't like, and what everyone else is doing. But at the end of the day, no one other than those companies really has the ability to say anything that matters, right? It's like lots of reporting and opinions, and you might be able to submit feedback somewhere, but it's not like it's a designed by committee open situation for any of those things. What other piece of software, what video game do you download and play? What thing in the real world is it where you have the ability to go, yeah, I don't like it, and I'm gonna keep doing the old thing? Like, and when has that ever actually benefited anybody other than like continuing to write checks while you're standing in line at the grocery store, enjoying your AM radio and listening to the baseball game? Like, those are all things that are like fun to do, but those are how you miss out on all the cool new things that are happening around you and without you. And so the folks that are like backing Gutenberg and all about Gutenberg are sort of coding for the future of WordPress. And the folks that are installing the classic editor are going to enjoy where they are, but they are choosing to stand still. And that's like goes all the way back to one of the things that like Matt has said or quoted from someone is, if you don't like change, that you'll like being obsolete even less. And so I just it seems pretty obvious that what the direction is going forward with all this. Get on with it.
Speaking of classic press, Gary Pendergast, WordPress core contributor and a Gutenberg core developer, also friend of the show.
Hey, Gary.
He's weighed in with his thoughts on Classic Press, which is a fork of WordPress created by Scott Bowler. And in his post, Pendergast actually praises the fork and extended an open invitation to Bowler to collaborate in the future. And quote, as a member of the WordPress core team, I certainly hold no ill feelings towards them, and I hope they'll be open to working with us in the future. I hope we'll be able to learn from their work to improve WordPress for everyone. Ultimately, we all share the same goal, creating a free and open web for everyone to enjoy. And while Classic Press has styled itself as a protest against Gutenberg for now, I hope they'll find their voice for something instead of just against something, end quote. And that was by Gary Pendergast. And so he also received harsh criticism in the comment. If one of these online jerks stopped by and left a comment and basically saying, better fix the 1,000 plus issues of Gutenberg instead of wasting time with blog posts. But in a great example of showing grace, Gary responded to this comment and actually received it as like a question as far as the Gutenberg team prioritizing their time. And he says that he believes that they're doing a reasonable job, but they could probably lean a little more towards blogging than they are now. Mm-hmm. And there was also he compared a number of open issues on certain other open source projects and says it's not really a good measurement of software quality or readiness.
Yep, I 100% agree.
And reading Gary's post, it sort of made me miss the days of reading blog posts from WordPress core developers. There's the Planet WordPress feed, and back in the day, Peter was publishing things, Matt was publishing things, Mark Jakewith, Jen Milo. Mm-hmm. There's some other core developers that were publishing things, and I always appreciated sort of getting their take on the deep knowledge that they have of the software, or maybe why they decided to lead the project in a certain direction. Yep. But you don't see that anymore, and I get it. In fact, a lot of the people on the Planet WordPress feed no longer work on WordPress, or they're no longer actively involved as core contributors, or they're not even around. They don't even post about WordPress anymore. So I don't know. I think Gary's post to me was a breath of fresh air, and I like to see things like that more often from the core developers, and how they could use Gutenberg to publish it. And then, hey, now they're spoon feeding themselves.
Exactly.
The future of WordPress.
Well, and part of what you're talking about was by design. Like originally, the make.wordpress.org didn't exist. There weren't all those blogs and P2s and sites to share all those things. And so everyone.
And that's where a lot of that stuff is nowadays.
So a lot of it is there. But I agree with you that the voice is different. Like reading Gary's personal blog and his experiences and opinions is more of, I value that more than the like official report and response for things like this. like what Jeff Paul does on the make.wordpress.org site with talking about what's going on with official releases is where I expect to see that communication happen. On Jeff's personal blog is where I expect to hear his thoughts and opinions on his experience of doing those things. And to me, that's just as newsworthy, or frankly, you'll learn more from that than you will from going through the whole list of issues that are going on. And so
But on the flip side, and I realize the other side of the argument as well, is that if we go back in time, and Jen Milo is a great example of this, where she would publish some things about WordPress or where the project's going or her thoughts on it. And if I thought it was newsworthy to a larger audience, I would write about it on the Tavern. There were other sites that would take what core developers are saying and say, well, this is where WordPress is going. This is what they think about it, and try and pin things against maybe internally and what's going on with WordPress. So, I can see how core developers would not be interested in publishing things like what Gary does on their personal site, even though it's personal. And I'm smart enough, and I think a lot of other people are smart enough to separate that personal side of things versus representing everything that's going on in the WordPress project. But yeah, I could see the other side of the equation as to why they wouldn't want to do that.
And that's, again, there's a voice and a reason why you publish on your own blog versus some other place. And I agree with Gary, and I'm guilty of it also. And this has kind of been one of those things that the WordPress project also suffers from, is this not enough people that build blogging software blog. It's always been a problem. And that was what made the early days of WordPress development kind of refreshing. Like you said, is the concept of eating your own dog food was like very real, and everyone was running the latest version. Everyone was tweaking and building things out. But the concept of this official voice and a mature piece of software and having a long-term support version or fork or promise that is made that versions of WordPress will be stable, everyone expects for these to come from some official channel that is really only internally self-policed anyways. We create this construct of an official channel, and then we deliver on it. Whether or not we do that on one personal blog or the WordPress.org blog, who cares? But as people have different expectations for a mature piece of software, and I get that, and I think that the WordPress project is rolling with that. Okay, this reminded me more of the Tavern forums, like we harken back to on occasion, where Gary writes a nice sort of topical post about his opinions on things. There's a few replies back and forth, and it's like a very forum-y type quote and respond to what it is that they're talking about. And so it reminds me a lot of what makes forums an interesting way or place for these kind of discussions to happen. Because
one thing I really appreciate, and I've said this before, is Dries, over the lead developer of Drupal. He, on almost a regular basis, he writes about his thoughts on technology and Drupal, the future of Drupal, things going on internally with the project, things that are going externally with the project, the Drupal Association, all kinds of stuff where you really, and I really appreciate reading that type of stuff. And one of my favorite types of posts by Matt Mullenweg is always his essays on whether that's tech or WordPress or WordPress's direction or the future of publishing, even the open web. So I would love to see more posts like that from him. But again, it just really, it sucks because with Matt and the words that he speaks or the words that he publishes are held in such high regard that every time he would write about WordPress, I could just imagine the people commenting just chomping at the bit to rip him down, to tear him down. And let me tell you, the quickest way to not want to publish anything anymore is to deal with that deluge of haters every time.
Yep. And it's
very demotivating.
It is super demotivating, and especially when it is are building something for what you feel like are the right reasons, out of love and for a community, for the software, for the freedoms, for all those things, and there are people that aren't on board with you 100%, and it's okay that they're not. The opinions are important. Diverse audience is important. All those things are important. But sometimes the criticism isn't always super great, and it's not about agreeing. It's not about everyone being best friends. It's not about everybody getting along 100%. That certainly makes the job easier, but those aren't the things that make the good software. They are just things that make writing software good. But I agree with everything Gary said here, and I'm happy that Gary's closer is my favorite part of his whole post. I hope they'll find a voice for something instead of just against something, and that's the whole. And the part, and I don't think he meant to do this, and I'm not picking the words apart, but it is interesting word choice also, because he starts that paragraph by saying, ultimately, we all share the same goal, which one of the nice things about a fork of software is you are allowed to change the goal if you wanted to. You can say that this fork of WordPress, our emphasis is not on democratizing publishing. It is on nurturing communication. And so now you have an emphasis on building good commenting experience and not an emphasis on democratizing publishing. You can share different goals with forks of software. But in general, having it be positive and having it be something that people can get behind instead of just being against something is a good way to position all of that and wrap that up.
We'll wrap it up here with a couple of quick stories. If you didn't get a chance to make it out to the WordCamp for Publishers 2018 conference in Chicago, Illinois, you can now view the videos for that event on the WordPress.tv. All the videos for the WordCamp for Publishers event are now you can watch for free over there on WordPress.tv. And also the WP Campus 2018 videos are available to watch for free via YouTube. So if you visit the WP Campus schedule webpage, it's actually pretty neat how they've done it. You can see links to visit the presenter slides. You can see a bio of what the talk is about, and the talk is embedded right there on the speaker's profile page, or you could just visit them all via the WP Campus channel on YouTube. Thanks to both events for making those videos available for free for everybody else to learn from.
Yep.
And with that, here's another neat little tool that's recently been created. Speaking of forks, WordPress core committer John Blackburn has released a new plugin called the Network Media Library, and it provides a shared media library across all sites on a WordPress multi-site network. So by default, the plugin uses a site ID 2 for the central media library, but the site ID can be customized via a filter hook, and access to the network-wide library is currently restricted to users who have author-level permissions with the upload files capability on the central media site. And he says, Blackburn says that in the plan for the future is to remove the need for users to be added to the central media library. Now, Frank, how'd you pronounce that?
I'm not going to try.
All right, but Frank Boutke,
don't even try.
Co-author of the multi-site global media plugin, asked Blackburn why he opted to fork his plugin instead of enhancing it. And Blackburn says that the main difference is that the original plugin supports local media files and his fork does not. Therefore, they serve different purposes, different groups of users. So, again, an opportunity there where forking comes into play. Mm-hmm. Forking's a beautiful thing when everything works out right.
I've used a bunch of John's plugins as like my picks of the week for things, and this would be no exception. The network, the network media library is kind of the way that this is supposed to work if you were going to do it. I feel like you want to have your media shared in a way that is invisible to users. They don't need to know or care that this is happening. And you want to do this probably on a network level. If you use multi-site or you happen to use multiple networks, then grouping your sites naturally by network and then letting them all share a central media library is the right way to build this. And so just like user switching and query monitor, I feel like John hits another home run with this one. And I'm happy to see he's tested it with the BBs. He's selfishly tested it with my WP user avatars plugin.
Yes.
And so that was good to see. And then it makes me curious what the need was. What exactly were they building? Or what was he working on, or what were they doing over at Human Made, or what was he introduced to? Or I know that this is something he's wanted to do for a long time, but what was the motivation behind this? And did they actually test this, or did they need to test it with regenerate thumbnails? Did they have people using user avatars in a central location where they had to use my cute little user avatars plugin to help them with that? Or I'm curious to know the backstory. And so that's another one of those good places where I'd like to see something backed up on John's blog about what the motivation was behind it.
And our last story today, Anders Noreen has launched a website called WP Glossary. We're big fans of Anders, if you haven't noticed, in the tavern. Mm-hmm. Almost every design he comes out with, every theme, we write about it because it's beautiful. He's a great WordPress theme designer. The site is WP Glossary, and it contains definitions for terms that people encounter when using WordPress. And this resource was born out of a need to provide documentation for client projects. So this is kind of cool.
It's super cool.
The WP Glossary, of course, it has a great design. You can click on different words. He's actually typed out all the definitions. He's done all the work for these definitions, and I like the way the pages are laid out. There's at last check, there's about 94 different terms, with more being added all the time. There's actually more than 25,000 total words, which make up the definitions of all these other terms. But definitely check it out. We'll have links to it in the show notes. And kind of WordPress still has tech speak jargon, and what this does is it turns it into plain English. So if you're new to WordPress, man, this would be a great place to start to learn the ins and outs of some of the things and terms that are used throughout the WordPress ecosystem.
I was happy to see, a lot of the major plugins covered in this: Jetpack, WooCommerce, BuddyPress, BBPress. There are lots of little like Akismet, Hello Dolly. It's pretty comprehensive. And I didn't get to look into the code behind it. I assume it's just a React app or something similar, but it looks nice. Search is easy and fast. And it's a very comprehensive multi-site, WPML, WYSIWYG. There's lots that are in here. So I like that they have Matt Mullenweg. He's the only name I could find, though, other than Dolly. So that I thought was funny. But I think it's appropriate. But yeah.
Of course. I don't have any other news stories to talk about. Unbeknownst to me, it's been storming like a beast outside. I had no idea until I looked at the radar and looked out the window.
Can't hear anything. I was curious what you were looking at out there.
I was looking to see if we were missing any trees.
You're missing out on a good storm, though.
I don't know if you could see this, but there's
you can see it. Oh yeah! Wow,
there's a lot of colors.
There's a lot of color there. That's not a big deal.
On the radar screen. So the last thing,
you guys get hit pretty hard with weather all the time, don't you?
No, I mean, look. Before the show went on the air, it was clear sky, and it was supposed to rain today. And I'm like, I just told my wife it's supposed to rain today, and then during the show, it's like, whoa, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
Anywho, I want to wrap it up here. I have a pick of the
see the storm. Wrap it up so you can go watch a storm. I see what you're trying to do. I feel like I have 10 other things we have to talk about.
I have a pick this week and you don't. So my pick this week is called WP Minute, and it's by David Peralty. I guess formerly known as David Peralty. It's Malcolm Peralty now over at Press Titan. He has a new channel on YouTube called WP Minute where he pretty much describes just a few headlines or just a news bit of information on YouTube. They're very quick. In fact, most of them are around a minute or two long. So very easy to digest, easy to keep on top of things. And David's actually a longtime friend and former co-host of WordPress Weekly. And it's been a while since I've seen him really kind of get back into the WordPress groove of things, but here he is with this, and he's doing Press Titan, and I'm happy to see him back. You know, he used to be the curmudgeon, used to be the devil's advocate on everything WordPress back in the day. So I'm glad to see him back and offering up his opinions and expertise on WordPress.
You can't have two curmudgeons on the same show, Jeff. It's got to have a yin.
I'm mostly the positive
and a yang.
I am mostly the positive guy over the years.
Am I the negative? Does that make me the negative guy?
No, you're the. I don't. You are words I cannot say on the air. I'll leave it at that. But,
and I'm uncomfortable for the first episode in a while. So
David, I appreciate you being back in the community and sharing your thoughts and opinions on things, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. Other than that, John, do you have any other stories, anything you want to say before we get out of here?
Not really, man. Just still working on all the things, and our house has is still being made into more of a house. So anyone that happens to care about the ins and outs of building a house, that is still apparently happening. And then anyone who is heard me talk about weird stuff going on around where I live, we did vote to remove that old dam, and so there's an old dam that's going to get pulled out, and so there are a couple of unhappy folks that are not pleased that we're removing the dam that is in our village, and so I am experiencing.
Well, tell them to install the classic dam plugin.
That's terrible. That's terrible. That's not how that works. You're spending too much time doing WordPress stuff. That's not possible.
Right.
But I mean, this is the first time in my doing political stuff that there are legitimately passionate, very unhappy people that are.
Do they know where you live?
Of course they do. Yeah, it's all public. Okay. It's all got to be public. That's okay. But yeah, it's the parallels between writing software and open source and being public and making decisions that are not everyone is going to agree with, but are the best decision for the community in the long run. These are things that I am experiencing at home outside of WordPress. And so there's lots of parallels there. So those are my only updates. It's just stupid, dumb things that are not super WordPress related, because the WordPress related stuff that I'm working on ain't worth talking about until it is in beta or in people's hands. So let's keep going on that and talk about it later.
And with that, it's going to wrap it up for this edition of WordPress Weekly. You can find show notes for this episode and all other episodes on wptavern.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jeffro, JEFFR0. That's right. Find me on
and me on GitHub and Twitter at JJJ or jjj.blog.
And for those of you who do have a Labor Day off, please enjoy it. I have a busy weekend ahead of me. I've got Oktoberfest on Friday, and then Sunday is the air show, but they're saying a 50% chance of rain. So go figure. The one day I want to go with a 50% chance of rain, but I'm going to go anyways and see what happens. But 3-day week, please take advantage of it. Please take a break. And if you can, do not use it as a day of, that's 12 more hours to get into a project. Give yourself some time. Take a break. Give your brain a break if you can. I know it's hard for me to say that, and for some people, they're in the grind and they got to work. But man, maybe somehow find some way to spend some time with your family or significant others, or just take a break.
I agree. I probably won't actually do that, but I do agree with you.
See, there you go. Anyway, it was great having you. We'll talk to you again next week. And everybody enjoy your holiday weekend if you celebrate it. And Talk to you next Wednesday afternoon. Say bye, John.
Bye, John.